Thanks, Rob. So today I'm going to be giving a talk called the Startup Developer Toolkit. And basically I'm going to walk through 8 tools that we use at Carbon 5 that I think all developers could and should use them or something like them. Each of these tools, in addition to being something that you can use, they also they embody a part of a process, and I want to talk about the process a little bit. So while this talk is primarily for developers, some of these tools are not just used by developers. They can be used by any other members of the team. And before I dig into it or talk about me or anything like that, I want to point out this URL down here at the bottom, if people can see it. It says carbon5.github.io/startup-developer-toolkit. I'm running this talk off of that URL. You can go there and get this information whenever. So if anybody nods off or gets bored or just feels like leaving, it's totally okay. You can go get this stuff. Whenever you want. So my name is Mike Wynholds. I went around and got a chance to meet all you guys just a couple minutes ago. And I'm the president of a company called Carbon 5. You guys saw Lane talk last week. She's a designer at Carbon 5. And so she probably talked a little bit about the company, but we're a product design and development shop. We've been around for about 13 years. I started the company with some partners about 13 years ago in San Francisco. My background is as a developer, so all of these tools that I'm going to be talking about are tools that I've used and we use. The type of projects we do tend to be large. So we work, if we're working on a 6-month engagement for Groupon or something like that, that might be a normal project for us. And we're going to use these tools, but these are also tools that can be used by a startup running on a total bootstrap. As I talk about the things I add, I also talk about how much they cost. And so I want to make sure, I want everybody to realize that they're accessible at all scales of coding. So we'll jump right in. So the first one I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. Actually, the site that we're looking at right now is being run off of GitHub. Who here's not familiar with GitHub? Anyone? Okay. So GitHub is, at its core, it's a hosted source control. And source control for a software developer should be like water. A place to store your most important, not your most important things in a business, but some of your most important assets of a business is your code. And GitHub is a very popular and a very useful place to do this. GitHub does a lot more than just store your source, but talk about a little bit of what it does. So I asked around, but who here, raise your hand if you're a developer, who here does development? And of all the developers, this is sort of out of curiosity, who here uses Git as source control? A couple people. Does anybody here not keep their code in any sort of source control system, like it's just on your computer? Okay, good. You're better than many of our clients sometimes. Not after they work with us, though. So Git, in my lifetime as a developer of 20 years or so of coding, I've gone through several iterations of using different tools. Git is fairly new. It was popularized because it was written by Linus Torvalds, the guy who invented Linux. And it's a really very full-featured source control system, but it's sort of more than that. So like you can set up very complex source code workflows as a way to collaborate with different people. So you guys are all on fairly small teams right now, so it's fairly easy. You probably have a very simple workflow. Most of our teams we work on are also small, although we might be working remotely with other developers in our San Francisco office or our clients that may or may not be remote. You can set up, like it says, very simple or very complex code workflows that allow you to control how code gets into your app. And it's very important. You want to be pretty careful about what goes into your app, your production app especially, right? Like, code is features, and when features get when features get out there to your users, they're there, and for good or for bad. So having a way to sort of control that and have some accountability for that is very important. This last bullet here about Git it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true. I mean, Git and GitHub are like super common. So as all of you get out into the world of work, either at this startup, hopefully they'll all be successful. And for those of you who like go out and do coding, this is, Git's a good tool to have in your tool belt. And that's Git. That's, you can get Git without using GitHub. And, you'll see like the $7 a month for GitHub, that's the sort of entry-level cost that you'd pay to host a private repository. It's actually free if you want to host public repositories at GitHub, but I assume everyone here has some desire to keep sort of intellectual property around their code right now, which is smart. So for $7 a month, you can get, you can have that capability, that private capability. And GitHub allows you to collaborate with other developers, not just in terms of like sharing code, but you can track issues and bugs with GitHub, and you can, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with pull requests. It's just another way to sort of have your developers interact via the GitHub site. And because GitHub is so popular, it interacts with basically every other developer tool that's out there. Has any of them that have sense, where it makes sense to interact with source control system, they do integrate and interact with GitHub. So this is a super go-to for us. The second tool I want to mention is called Pivotal Tracker. And these are going to get less, I'm sure some people have heard of this tool, but as these tools go on, I think more and more of you will maybe not be familiar with them. And Pivotal Tracker is essentially a project management tool. It's an agile project management tool. So when Lane was here, if you guys were all sort of in the room listening to her talk, I don't know if she talked about agile software development. She did. Okay. So is everybody sort of familiar with agile? I mean, as I said, these tools are useful, but they also they automate processes that I think are very important. And we at Carbon 5 have adopted and have for the past, since we've been around, about 13 years, agile processes for doing software development. And when I came and gave a talk last year at Startup UCLA, my whole talk was just about agile. And it was good, but I wanted to expand it a little bit. And I feel like there's a few key components of agile that I want to talk about real quick, and that Pivotal Tracker automates for you. And so we use, this is a tool we're in also like every day, all the time. We pretty much track features and bugs for all of our projects with this tool. Our clients are in it all the time. And one thing I sort of forgot to mention at the beginning, there are other options for this stuff. There are other agile project management tools. There are other source control systems that are maybe just as good as GitHub. But so I'm talking about the ones that we like best and that we use. But and I'm going to ask this a lot. Like I like to do the raise your hand if thing. So I hope you guys don't mind. But who here who here is familiar with agile or uses agile processes in their work? Anyone? A little bit? Yep. Okay. So the first thing the main thing we do with Pivotal Tracker is something called story writing. And this is really just a way of breaking down your product into features that your developers can build with a few rules. So we want to break them down fairly small. The developers out here all know, or even the non-developers realize that the process of building software is about breaking a complex problem down into small enough pieces that you can sort of comprehend it and build it and plug it into the rest of the stuff. So, Agile has its own special way of doing that. And one of the things that Agile projects do is when they describe features, they are always from the perspective of the end user. So it's very easy for a developer to say, okay, this task that I'm going to work on is called create a database table, create a user's database table. That's totally valid. You have to do that. But it doesn't mean anything to the end users. And you're thinking about your code base sort of in layers. And thinking about code in layers is a useful way to understand abstractions. But as a way to define units of work that developers can do and the business users or end users can validate, which is very important also, you kind of need to slice it vertically instead of sort of horizontal layers, and if that makes sense the way I'm talking about it. So like, if you can define a story that says, as a user, I can log into the site so that I can access all the features that only logged in users can access, that's a user-facing feature or a user story. And in Agile, that's how you write all of these things, or 95% of them. If you have to if you have a technical task that doesn't fit into that, it's called a chore, and it's fine, but as much as possible, you write your features from the perspective of the end user. And the other thing you do is you identify acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria that a business person can validate is correct. So it's great if a developer does a technical task, but then they're the only ones that can really validate whether they did it right, until you get to the point that some functionality is exposed to the end user. So if you can slice these things vertically and write your stories from the perspective of an end user, you can also write acceptance criteria that your business cohort can then validate that the way it was written is the way that it's understood by the sort of product owner, the person that's sort of signing off on that. And I realize that in a startup, the developers are also product people, and sometimes the product people are also developers. Everybody's doing everything, but that still doesn't mean the developer should be the only person that knows how to validate whether they did the thing right. You want the whole team to be able to do that. So story writing is how you translate your business requirements into technical requirements, and that might sound kind of trite or like it's a small thing, but in the world of consulting on big projects, that is the thing that makes projects fail. And I think it makes the more you get into situations where you're not in the minds of your colleagues, you guys are kind of in the minds of each other because you're working together all the time. But when we're working, you will find yourself in those scenarios where you need a tool to help you and a process to help you make sure you've got your requirements written down correctly. So that's good. That lets you write all the stuff down in a way that developers can pluck off and develop and can be validated. But it's also very useful to know how long it's going to take to build your stuff, right? You're going to have deadlines that you're going to set up. You're going to have conferences or trade shows or whatever it is that you're going to demo your product at, and you need to know what's going to be in there. You need to sign up for some deadlines, basically, as part of building a product. So the second thing that you can do in Pivotal Tracker is you can estimate your stories. So you've written all your stories, and you can estimate them. And this is, it's not how many days or how many hours the story it's going to take. It's level of effort, which is similar, but developers are notoriously bad at estimating time, but very, very good at estimating how difficult a task is compared to another task that they've already done. And that's what you do here. The stories get points, and you have, there's a chicken and egg. You have to have sort of a genesis story in order to have something to compare other stories to. But once you come up with sort of a, hey, let's use as a user, I can log into the system. Let's assume that's a 2-point story. You can essentially estimate all the rest of your stories based on that. And this is done by developers, not by, because they're the ones that are going to be doing the effort to build this stuff. And what you get out of this is Pivotal Tracker, once you've written your stories and once you've estimated them, you start working. And you work in these iterations. And as a developer, you pluck a story off the backlog. You say, I'm going to start it. You hit the start button. You start coding. You finish coding. You hit the finish button. And you push that code to your staging server, your QA server, your acceptance server, whatever it is, a place where you test. And you press the deliver button. And now the business guy or the hustler or whoever the design person may be, anybody who's not the person who just coded it, goes in and basically validates it against the acceptance criteria that you agreed on and you wrote down. And they either accept it or they reject it. If they reject it, it just goes through the cycle again until eventually it gets accepted. Once it gets accepted, those points, those 2 points that you guys decided this story was worth, they get added to your weekly velocity. And you work for a few weeks, and the tool starts to understand what your weekly velocity is, how many points you can get done in a 1-week iteration. And once you've got a decent average weekly velocity, and you've estimated this level of effort for your stories, the tool starts to tell you when you're going to hit certain milestones. And that's super useful. This is not a hand-wavy estimation. This is a metrics-based estimation of when stuff is going to get done. And if you can define your milestones and your releases by, as soon as these top 10 features are done and accepted, then I'm ready to release an alpha, or I'm ready to try and find our first 10 customers or something like that. This tool tells us and will tell you very accurately when that's going to happen. So that can be really useful, and so much more accurately than if you just say, hey, when are these 10 things going to be done? I mean, you could be off by easily, double, or 100% of what you estimate. So once you've got this stuff, the last piece of this puzzle, and I alluded to this, top 10 stories in a milestone or in a feature, you have to prioritize. And so, the whole group writes stories, your business, your design, your dev, your developers estimate, and then your non-developers or your product owner essentially prioritizes. And this is a contract you can have with each other. It's a contract we have with our clients. We say, we'll do whatever you want first, and you guys can set priorities. This is what's most important to the business, and the tool will tell you when it's going to get done. So this gets more and more important as more and more features go into your app and more people come onto your team. And if your developers aren't sitting next to your product people day to day, this tool can be super helpful. If anybody, I would love people to ask questions. I'm fine with questions during. If people want a little clarity, I'll also obviously be around after to answer questions. But since I'm sort of jumping from tool to tool, if you feel like something's missing or something's lost, I'd be happy to answer it. Yeah.
So if you're just starting, Pivotal Tracker seems a little overwhelming. And that's kind of why we moved away from it.
Mm-hmm.
We went for something that's just a task list that's manipulatable.
Yeah.
Trello.
Yep.
Played around with that. I'm curious if you think that was a bad move, or if you think that you need to start off with something that serious that's able to estimate. We have part-time developers, and it makes it kind of tough to do things that are.
So you can use Pivotal Tracker as sort of a glorified task list. It's a little hard. I've been using this tool so long that I'm like, no, wait, it's super easy, but I've been using it for a decade, you know what I mean? So I think you're fine using something simpler until it's just important that you take a step back periodically. We formalize this in our projects. We do things called reflections. If anybody, that's another Agile thing. We do them every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, where you take a step back and you go, all right, what's going well and what's going poorly on this project? Actually, I have a slide that talks about it a little bit, because we built a tool that you can use to do some of these reflections. But you do this I wish, we should thing. I like this stuff that's going on in our project. I wish we blah, blah, blah. And as soon as you get to, I wish our Trello project management tool could tell me when this was going to be released, then maybe it's time to move over to a bigger, better tool. But I certainly think, if it's not doing it for you because it's overly complicated for what you need, then by all means, set it aside until it's something that you do need. The Pivotal Tracker compared to like other non-agile project management tools is pretty simple, like versus building something out in Microsoft Project or something, if anybody's even heard of that. This, you could just write and drag stories, drag them up and around. You don't necessarily need to use the estimation capabilities and some of that stuff. So that's Pivotal Tracker. That's also $7 a month. Again, free if you're okay with your tracker being public, which probably not. I mean, who's going to really look right away, but still. So the next thing I want to talk about is deployment, cloud deployment. Who here deploys their software to the cloud somewhere? Anyone? Do you use Heroku? What do you guys use?
I'm just using a custom Git push script.
Where does it wind up though?
AWS.
Okay. Same?
AWS.
Yeah. So Heroku is a tool that sits on top of AWS. Like a lot of these cloud deployments, there's, behind the scenes, there's really only a few. There's AWS, there's Google, there's Rackspace. I don't even know. There's a few others like Linode and some they're slightly different services. They're a little bit less cloudy and more like you get a machine of your own. But Heroku is a deployment platform. They call it platform as a service, but it just winds up deploying to AWS. But it gives you a lot of bells and whistles and ease of use. So like writing your own custom Git deploy script is awesome, but it took you some time, right? And sometimes that time is better spent doing something else, especially with the price tag entry level of Heroku deploy is $0. And this isn't one of those it has to be open source to be $0. This is, you just have to run it on the lowest version of their processor capability. They're called dynos in the Heroku world. One web dyno is free. And if you're talking about, an acceptance environment or even a production environment that's only going to get, if you only have 100 users because you're early stage, one dyno is plenty. I mean, unless you're doing machine learning stuff. But then you've got other tech to think about. So Heroku is definitely the quickest and easiest get up and running platform that we've used. And we use it for a ton of our clients. So quickest startup of any of the cloud providers. But it also scales big, which I'll talk about in a second. You deploy via Git push, so just like you do, but it's sort of built in. It integrates, through that Git interaction, it integrates with services around continuous deployment. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But Heroku, again, like GitHub, is super popular, and therefore it's got integration points with all the other tools out there, which is very nice. You wind up just chaining a lot of these things together, and you get to spend all your time worrying about your code and your business and not about infrastructure, which is sort of the goal, especially at $0 a month. And there's a huge library of add-ons. Now, Heroku is one of these things that, to make it so easy, you have to sort of abide by their way of doing things. Heroku started out only working with Rails, but now it works with a lot of other frameworks and a lot of other environments. But you don't get to just install a version of MongoDB or something on your Heroku server because you don't have a Heroku server. You've got a dyno, which is something they made up that's like a unit of computational power that just is what it is out there in the Heroku cloud. So in order to get access to things that aren't just, this is my Ruby environment or this is my JavaScript environment or Java environment, you need to use their add-on. So there's an add-on for databases like Postgres and MySQL. There's an add-on for all sorts of stuff. Luckily, there's an add-on for everything. It used to be that Heroku's great until you need to use this special technology that they don't support, but the reality is they support them all now. So that's ease of deploy, and then there's scale. So you just drag a slider and your dynos go up. You drag it back and your dynos go down. You pay more, you pay less. Yeah, I know, I don't know if you're laughing at sort of the ridiculousness of like just dragging a computer up. I mean, but like it literally is that easy, and it works. And it's a super easy way to scale. You can like burst scale, you know, like, oh, we're sending out an email blast. Why don't I just drag these, you know, drag from 1 to 5 dynos for a day, you know? Heroku charges monthly, but if you do a day, they'll prorate it for a day, you know, like. This works great until you really hit big scale. Like it gets expensive. Like all of these cloud providers, once you get to a certain size, it makes much more sense to go in-house. But you have to get kind of big before that's worth it, because you need to have people to do it. You need to hire people. You need to like, you know, they worry about security. They worry about uptime. They worry about fault tolerance. Like you don't want to worry about all that stuff. You don't want to worry about any of that stuff, and you don't have to. So I'd say probably 9 out of 10 of our clients get up and running on Heroku, and then sometimes they migrate over to some other thing, but it's just so easy to get up and running, and it's free, you know, for an acceptance environment or early production environment, so there's really not a lot of reason not to. But again, there's lots of options that are similar. This is the one we find the most compelling. This tool, I don't think anybody's heard of yet. This is our tool, so this is a little bit of a self-shout out here. This is a collaborative sort of brainstorming tool that is essentially sticky notes on a board that real-time collaboration with remote people. So a bunch of people can, you know, sign into the board. This is like a Node.js and Socket.io app for you developers out there. So, you know, if you're logged in on your computer, I'm logged in on my computer, and I drag this note, you see it being dragged. You type, I see you typing. And that's about it. It's pretty wide open, but we do a lot of remote collaboration, and as Lane, when she was here, probably actually was doing a lot of physical stickies on stuff, because that's her, you know, that's what she does. And that's fantastic if you're all in the same room. If you're not in the same room and you've ever tried to do stickies on a wall via like a video conference, it doesn't work at all. So this, while it's not as good as being in the same room, is sort of the next best thing. So you guys are quite often probably all in the same room. But the times when you're not, this is a free tool, and it works pretty well. We do anything where you put stickies on the wall. We do something called story mapping with this, which is sort of a high-level activity around story writing that I talked about in Pivotal Tracker. You organize your stories on stickies in a 2-dimensional grid, and you organize them in a certain way. You do it on a wall. There's like a white paper. If you go out and search for story mapping, you read this white paper about it, and it's on a wall. And can't do that if if you're here and somebody's there. We do story mapping on this. I mentioned reflections. I like, I wish. We do that with stickies on the board too. Everybody sits down and writes down, I like this about the project. I like that everybody shows up on time. I wish that Bob would stay late, but he's always leaving at 5 to go drinking with his buddies. Mike to go drinking with his buddies. Then you put them on the wall. But again, if you can't all be in the same room, same thing. Validation board. There's lots of stuff. So this is a real free. There's no version of StoryMapper, at least right now, that costs anything. So definitely, if you have this need, this is a tool that we use and our clients have taken and started using it themselves. So I think it's kind of useful. Talk about continuous deployment. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say continuous deployment? There's like an end goal of this automation, this agile process and automation and this push towards testing, unit testing, and automated unit and functional testing that results in this. So if you do all these things, and I'll talk about the things in a little bit more detail, but if you do all these things, you get this benefit, which is continuous deployment, which is to say, as a developer, when you're done writing your code, you could commit it, push it up to your Git repo, and you sort of twiddle your thumbs for about a minute or two, and that feature you built is live. So I don't know, is anybody, like, there's a lot of steps that go into that. I write some code, I finish writing my code, and I commit it to the repository. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen, right? It needs to be tested. It needs to be tested. It needs to be deployed, I guess. There's really only two things, but those are kind of big things. If you keep a suite of automated tests running and that is enough to inspire a lot of confidence that your code works in your code base, then you can quite often get away without manual testing. And if you have automated deploy scripts, then you can get away without doing automated deploys. And it essentially adds up to this. You need a tool to kind of do it for you. So a continuous deployment tool, one we use a lot is called Circle CI. And what happens is every time I check in code, it integrates with GitHub and lots of other things. It realizes that I've done that. It pulls that code. It runs my automated test suite. If that fails, it will do the blame game. It will figure out who did it. It will email the team. It will basically say, like, something went wrong. This is something that needs to be fixed. It's not going to push broken code to anywhere. If those tests pass, it sends that, basically does a build out to your environment. Again, assuming that it has a hook, assuming you have that automated. And, this is the type of deployment that web companies, like, that anybody deploying software on the web should be striving to do. Nobody knows when Google, like Google's main website, their search site, they don't do like, we're going to do a build, like this is a bunch of features, right? Like, you're there one day and you're like, oh, that's a tiny little thing that's new, and that's a kind of new thing. Or, I mean, that's what every service you use out there does that, right? Like, every once in a while they'll do a revamp or something like that, but most of the time it's a little trickle of features, and you're just used to it. And that's continuous deployment. So it takes a lot to kind of get there, especially continuous deployment into production. Most of our work is we do continuous deployment into our testing and acceptance environments, but the client doesn't quite feel comfortable with code just turning into features for their end users quite yet. So I've touched on one thing as I've talked about continuous deployment, and that's testing. That's another thing that I talked a lot about last year. Who are the developers here that write automated tests when they write their code? Does anybody do it? Not really? So as your code base gets bigger and bigger, and you have more and more features, I'm not going to harp on this right now. I feel like I harped on it last year a little much. I would really urge developers to start reading about test-driven development and the benefits of automated unit tests. It's, like I said, as your code base gets bigger and your feature set gets bigger and your product gets bigger, you are going to start to realize that your productivity your productivity will start doing this. It'll be on sort of a downward slope. As every time you touch a piece of code, it has the potential to affect other parts of your code in ways that aren't totally clear. That's just the nature of code. We can design all we want, we can be modular, but the reality is our code is interconnected, and touching something here can affect something here. And it gets harder and harder and harder to manually validate that all this stuff works. So setting aside the whole continuous deployment thing, maybe you don't really care about that. But I would definitely urge people to look into the automated testing stuff. I'd be happy to talk about it, after the talk if people have questions or people have tried it. So I've talked about some of this stuff. Runs your test suite, and then automatically deploys when you got a successful build. Some of these ones near the end are getting. I mean, $19 a month isn't that much, but it's like more expensive than a lot of the other ones, right? This next one is even more expensive, $24 a month. And ironically, I think this is the one that if you had to skip on one of these, I'd skip on it. And it's like half of the overall cost. But I think it's important. This is a tool called Code Climate, and it does static code analysis. So static code analysis is just a bunch of pre-written rules that tell you when your code has something called smells. And smells is a term that people actually use in the world of coding, and it means what it sounds like it means. There's something weird about your code. It works. Maybe your tests even run, but it smells a little bit, I think there's probably something wrong there. I don't know exactly what it is, but I can tell because I smell it, So that happens in code all the time, right? You're not going to do it perfectly, and you're supposed to go back and make it better and make it better and make it better. This tool only runs for Ruby and Rails, but there are lots of other tools. Sometimes they're called linters. If you're a JavaScript programmer, you've heard of JSLint or JSHint maybe. It'll give you a bunch of suggestions, like this method is too long. Consider breaking it up into multiple methods. Or it looks like you've got duplicated code here and here. Consider refactoring that into something, a module. There's some other ones actually that are a little bit more important around security. So if you're deploying something on the web, there's lots of, people read over the, maybe 3 to 6 months ago, all these security vulnerabilities in Ruby on Rails, they came out and all of a sudden everybody's everybody's site in the world is vulnerable to this really easy SQL injection attack or this attack or that attack. The more popular a framework or a whatever gets, the more black hats out there decide to try and attack it and be malicious. And so tools like this can actually, they can identify 90, 95, 99% of the security vulnerabilities because they're all common. Once somebody figures it out, it's sort of in the database of security vulnerabilities. And so these tools, what we tend to use this tool for a lot is to make sure we're not doing anything dumb. I mean, I've been coding 20 years and I'll run my code through Code Climate and I'll be like, 3 major security vulnerabilities? Good. I mean they're subtle in code. They can be tiny things, but that's all it takes. So tools like Code Climate, they aim to sort of make code quality a metric that you can track. I mean, this gives you percentage grade or a 4.0, blah blah blah. Some of it's bullshit, a little bit. Like this is a 4.0, this is a 3.7, but and it's not going to tell you whether your code really is designed well or there's art in coding that this is not going to pick up on, but it can give you a sense. And it makes code quality something that is visible, even to non-coders. They can see this, and it makes it a priority. This last bullet I 100% believe is true, that you need to understand your technical debt before it buries you. And again, the longer a code base lives, the more, if you're not careful, the more technical debt you'll accumulate, like the more junk you'll accumulate in your garage if you don't clean it out, right? So constantly going back and making sure that you're keeping your code base clean will mean that your productivity stops going down, and you just want you want your productivity to stay level, but you're working with a bigger and a bigger and a bigger product and a bigger code base. It's hard to keep. I mean, it's a lot of work to just maintain the same level of productivity as you had in the beginning with nothing, with a clean slate, where you're everything I do is great. I'm not dealing with this bug that I sort of created accidentally or whatever. And then I talked about this, like these tools help you pick up on security issues, which are super important. And there's a lot of free versions of this. This Code Climate is nice because it's a web interface. It automatically integrates with GitHub. You press a button, it tells you your code, your grade. You could, but it costs $24 a month. For free, you could integrate a command line version of this tool into a build process. You could run it periodically. It would do the same thing. But I'm a fan, I'm a fan now of static code analysis. I think it's gotten better. I think it used to be kind of dumb, but I don't think it's dumb anymore. So I got two more quick ones. This is one everybody's heard of, I'm 100% sure, or I think. Metrics. Pretty much, Lane, I'm sure, talked a lot about validating your ideas. And one of the ways you do that is through metrics. And there's a lot of competitors to Google Analytics, but man, for free, this thing does a ton. Standard web metrics, custom events, real-time, daily, this is a powerful tool. Funnels, integrating with A/B testing, conversions, and it takes 2 seconds to get up and running with Google Analytics. It's literally copying a chunk of JavaScript and throwing it into your template. Deploy your code base, and it's running. So anybody who's not using some web metrics tool, I would suggest doing it. Even if you don't know exactly what you want to track yet, which is totally fair and valid, you just get a bunch of stuff for default, by default, that is super useful. Stuff you didn't know you'd want, you realize is useful. So the last tool on here is something called New Relic. And this is a little bit like a Google Analytics, but it's not around recording metrics. It's around performance monitoring. So it's sort of like metrics around performance. And there's a free version of this. You pay for more features in New Relic, but the free version is fine. And it tells you average page load times, average time spent in the database, average time spent rendering your template, average time spent querying out to AJAX calls, querying to Facebook, querying to Google, blah, 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 blah. Per page, aggregated across your site, or it breaks out time spent in the browser versus on the server. It does a lot of stuff, and it's also pretty easy to integrate. So these tools that give you insights into what your app is doing across your whole customer base are totally mind-opening, I think. And amazingly, a lot of them are free. So New Relic, it runs in your production app, so it actually it gives you performance monitoring of your production app. Like I said, it gives you information about what's happening in the browser and on the server. And it doesn't slow your app down, which is sort of the secret sauce for these guys. And I know the guy that started this company, and I remember talking to him, and he's like, this isn't going to work if it slows the site down at all. We need to guarantee less than 5% hit. It used to be that you never did performance monitoring in a production app. If you thought your site was slow, you ran some stuff in a sandbox environment and tried to figure it out. And it just was weird because you're like, how am I supposed to recreate exactly what my customers are doing? I don't know the whole point is, if I don't know why it's slowing down, I don't know exactly what they're doing. So getting something running in production was kind of a big deal. And now it's kind of ubiquitous. And it just lets you track this stuff. And it gives you some good alerts. So we use this on a lot of our stuff. Your site goes down, New Relic lets you know. If your site starts going slow, you can set thresholds. And, or if a part of your site stops working, like your credit card, if you're taking credit card transactions and your credit card processor goes down, how are you going to know? So New Relic will give you that too. The last thing you want is to discover that a week ago your credit card processor stopped taking transactions and you're wondering why your bank account isn't going up very much, right? You need a little insight into this stuff.
Mike, I have a question on that
Does this tool?
Yeah, Relic, does that help you on that at all, or just not really, or not sure?
No. Unfortunately, PCI compliance is not, like, it's so much about what's going on outside your code and outside your, even outside your running app that no, you need to hire like really expensive firms to come in and audit. But I mean, most people just farm that out. Like, people decide just not to store credit cards on their own server.
Right.
It's too much of a pain. It's too risky. So that's 8 tools. And all added up, it's $57 a month, which, is pretty cheap. And if you take Code Climate out and you're like, I'm going to do something else, it's, it's $33 a month. These are the 8 tools we use for our clients that we're doing like multi-million-dollar projects on. They're totally that good, and they're this cheap. So that's sort of the point of this talk. Like, take a look at these things. They're all geared to be affordable and easy to integrate and give you a lot of information. And they have all figured out how to make money the moment you guys' idea turns into like the next great thing, right? Like when you guys blow up, they're gonna blow up right along with you and make money, and everybody's gonna be happy, right? When you guys are all billionaires, they'll make a few $1 million too. But for now, they just want you using the tool and getting to know how to use it. So that's it. Definitely happy to answer questions about anything. Yeah.
So we kind of did what Smart as K-12 did with just building our own project management tool, and we run it on like a Google Doc that's nicely color-coded.
Yep.
And so we've tried doing it where if something in development takes 2 to 3 days, we try to break it up into 2 to 3 day chunks.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you come across something that like it needs more time than that.
Yeah.
And then we come back, like, how would you, so you sort of talked about what happens when you get done with something, but what happens when you need more time? Like, do you even break that task up even more? Or, I mean, do you like, maybe we shouldn't do this feature given that we have 7 weeks left? Or, how do you sort of evaluate that process?
Sure. Well, yeah. So first of all, understanding how long something's going to take is trickier than it sounds, but you want to do it precisely so you can make those business decisions, right? Like, oh man, is this actually a 2-week thing?
Yeah.
Well, let's do this after Startup UCLA, or whatever, or let's deprioritize this. It's not worth 2 weeks of effort. So
we kind of just did that on an ad hoc basis, just like feeling things out.
yeah.
So.
Well, to the extent that feeling things out is effective, then do that. Like, take on as little overhead as possible. And to the extent that Pivotal Tracker is more overhead than you need, then go Google Doc or go Trello or go something. But just be ready to be open to understanding the limits of the tool you're using, and learn, and trying to realize when it might be time to invest in looking into something else. So I don't know if anybody knows this analogy, but like the frog in a pot of slowly boiling water is like never going to know to jump out until it's too late, right? Because it's just so slow, and there's no drastic change in your environment. So that's why I'd say, every once in a while, take a step back and be like, is this tool doing, for all this stuff, like, is the tool we're using doing what we want? What could be doing better? And if you get to the point where you're like, man, there's like 3 things that we wish it was doing better, I think it might be time to take a look at something else. In the case of Pivotal Tracker versus color-coded Google Doc, the part about figuring out how long future tasks are going to take, that seems to be the likely future culprit, right? Like right now you can do it by feel, and if you're more or less accurate about your stuff, then don't change anything. If you find yourself, you know, like, oh man, this happened twice, we thought this was a 3-dayer and it really was a week and a half, then you know, that is one of the features of Pivotal Tracker that I love. It's like you use it right and you have to like warm it up by working for a few weeks in it, but then it starts telling you stuff that you wouldn't otherwise know. But other than that, it's really just like a color-coded Google Docs on steroids, you know, with like drag and drop, so.
Are there any mobile tools that you think of? I mean, from the user interaction perspective, like, that stand out for you?
So a bunch of these tools, like the analytics tools work for mobile. Google Analytics and New Relic will give you information about mobile stuff. Yeah, I mean, let me think. Like,
Do those work with native apps, or like, is it just you're talking like a mobile optimized kind of site?
definitely Google Analytics has SDKs for native mobile, so you can do. So there's no, like in a native mobile app, there's no like page view, which is the standard unit of work that Google Analytics measures. But Google Analytics sort of has custom events, which are sort of at the same, they're just as, they've been elevated to the same level as like, I can track a page view, I can track this event that I can categorize in any way I want. And that's, you know, the way you might do that in a highly, like, even a web app that's not really page-based, it's more like Boardroom, like you're dragging cards around. You load a page and then you drag cards around for an hour, right? Like that's one page view, that's not really what the app is. So we've created, you know, custom categories of events that are like, created a sticky, I moved a sticky, I deleted it, I joined, you know, I logged into a board or I logged out of a board. And those are the important metrics to track, and you can do all that in mobile. The other metrics one, New Relic, I am pretty sure it has sort of the same capabilities. You can integrate it into your native mobile. And then, you know, some of the other tools are a little bit more around managing the process and not specifically the code itself. So, yeah, sort of a terrible answer to your question, Rob, but.